Hey, I'm Ozzy from Three Monkeys Solderless, and welcome back to Sunday Talks with the Marshmello Man. So this is episode 3. I'm going to try to keep this one short so that it's, bite-sized, and we've got a few questions to answer. Wanted to thank everybody for asking questions and for participating. So what I'm going to do is I've got the video that was posted last week up, and then there's some comments below, which I will delve into. So the first one we've got is from Richard. We have, thank you for all your posts, info, and videos. Do this again. Rock on, Ozzy. Well, thanks, Richard. Appreciate the kind words and the encouragement. I guess there are a lot of posts, a lot of stuff going on. So yeah, we're doing it again right now. So there you go. Now we've got Jamie Gutsky. Let's see what Jamie's got going on here. So, and essentially my comparisons were at 140 of Nightmare Link on Fire Riff. Then go to 110 of Actual Link and hear the great similarities between the live and recorded tones. Distortion was there. More in this recording than I've found than others as well. Of recorded soundboard England records Nightmare, but it has a little extra something in its recorded content. And I think Dave mentioned during the show, we've got a new record coming up, Michael Anthony, at the beginning of the last song, You Really Got Me. He yells, Where's Ted? Yep. So who knows, but to my ears, this recording is more than any others from that first album. Touring sounds awfully close to what was done in the studio, minus the extra dust sprinklings. Even at the end of the boot link, there's the rehearsals for this very show. Some more ways of listening to the similarities between live and recorded from this exact period of the first record. You dig? Yeah, I dig. P.S. I'm probably way off. No, I don't think so. Yeah, I mean, I think it's, obviously him and with his gear. So, I mean, it's going to sound that way. It's sort of like, I don't know whether we need to argue about whether the red is Monza red or, Fiera red or, Chevy red or Ferrari red or whatever it would be. It's red, right? So, I think that, I agree there's definitely big similarities between the two, but I guess, we all are going to hear things very different, right? So, like when we were talking before about speaker curves, right? And how these speakers, they have a graph, right, of the level at different frequencies, right, which create the tone print, right? So you'll have from 0 hertz all the way up to 20 kilohertz. You'll have dips, peaks, valleys, all this stuff that when combined as a whole create a sound, right? The sound that you're listening to. Now, our hearing is very similar to a speaker response, right? So if you were to test hearing in people, and if you were to be very precise about it, I'm not talking about going to your doctor and getting a very, basic hearing test, but if you were to really zone in on each frequency and the level to which they perceive each frequency, I think you'll find that people's ears have that kind of a curve to them. Now, a lot of that has to do with how your brain interprets things. A lot of it has to do with whether you've had any hearing damage. Some of it may have to do with the shape and size of your ear canal, how your tympanic membrane works, how the anvil and hammer work, the shape of your eardrum, how thick it is, how it resonates, the hairs and the nerves. All those things anyway are going to create dips and valleys at different frequencies. So when we're talking about hearing, we don't hear the same things the same way, right? We can identify the same things as in we have common ground, right? So if I see red as blue and you see red as green, when we both look at something that is red, we could both identify it, right? Even though we're seeing it differently. So yeah, I mean, I think that's one of the things that makes there no right answers, right? Some people would require these frequencies to be accentuated to hear something that they feel is, more pleasing to their ears. So yeah, going through the boot, yeah, I don't know whether I want to, because I can't, listen to it while it comes through on the video here. So it would just be me sitting there going. So I had listened to it. And yeah, I think it's very similar. There's still a little bit of splat that somehow is missing between, the overhead mics of Eruption and these recordings, right? So there's still some differences there. But yeah, it was definitely done around that time. And we've got, another question from Jimmy DeVere. Thanks for the interesting discussion. You're welcome. Yes, it might have been the guitars. I don't really have any further questions regarding the amp short, but you did touch on something I've been thinking about. You mentioned speaker curves and how it's dependent on so many factors, including SPL sound pressure levels. One thing I've been noticing and fighting with is, first of all, I'm not sure how many modern guitarists really play unattenuated plexis on 10 anymore, but I have issues with increasing bass response as the amp is cranked without attenuation, just straight into two cabs. It's a different experience, and the acoustic phenomena really come into play at that volume. The bass response in the speaker cab starts to build up and get out of control. The reflections off the wall go crazy, and it's very difficult to play without some sort of EQ pedal shelving the bass. Okay, to be fair, this is a shared cathode 67, right? So not the super lead. Anyways, I thought I'd share these observations that things can change dramatically, attenuated versus non-attenuated. Oh, they definitely can. So in terms of issues with increasing bass response as the amp is cranked, yes, speakers flatten and fatten as they start to reach saturation, right? That's to say that the frequency response has less peaks and valleys in it. It starts to get a flatter curve, and it's more accentuated towards the lows, like relative to the low end, the high end gets attenuated. Let's see what the other part of this was. Acoustic phenomena really get to play at that volume. Well, I mean, anytime you're in any room, in any situation, you have so many variables that will come into play regarding what the sound is going to be, right? So the bass response in this starts to build up and get out of control. The reflections off the wall go crazy. It's very difficult to play without some sort of EQ shelving, right? So, yeah, I mean, let's say frequencies, right? They have a length and a speed, right? In a sense. So as they start to bounce off of things, where they are when they meet again in the phase of the 360-degree cycle, right, will determine what's canceled and what isn't. There can be situations where you'll have reinforcement, right? So you might find that moving a cabinet around in a room can have the effect of maybe, curtailing that bass response, right? You'll find that that's the case. Smaller, you get more mid-range. Larger, it starts to get a little bit less bass. That's why like these little, and I've got them, like these little ISO cabs tend to sound really kind of boxy, right? It's because how big they are in the reflections and what they have. In terms of timing, the wave to come back at the speaker and change the way the things sound, as well as the way the microphone sees the different waves hitting one another and canceling out frequencies, right? So also you would have everything in the world has like resonant frequencies, which would be the frequency at which they tend to become active, right? So it would be like a pitchfork is a great example of a resonant frequency. When you bang it, it sounds out a note, right? And that's the frequency that is inherent in that shape and size of metal. And if you were to excite it with energy, right? Like, let's say through vibration, let's say you were just to vibrate it, sort of like if you were to lick your finger and put it around a glass rim to make it sort of sing. that will create that resonant frequency, right? It's fundamental. So if you have the cabinet on the floor, the room, all the different things, these are all going to resonate harder at certain frequencies than others. So you'll hear a lot about coupling, right? Like floor coupling with hi-fi equipment that a lot of guys want to get their speakers up off the floor. That's why you'll see a lot of studio monitors up on stands. That's why, Eric Johnson uses the tone chair, right? Because he doesn't want his head sitting on the cabinet. He likes the way a particular chair he has that he sits the amplifier on sort of has its center frequency that can vibrate back into the tubes. So, experimenting with mic placement, cabinet placement, where it is in terms of coupling with the floor, all those things will have a dramatic effect on what this amplifier will sound like. So experimentation is definitely the case. To be shared, he was also talking about that this was a shared 67, right? So that's a really cool amp, right? So I'm curious, Jimmy, about your amp. Is it an aluminum chassis, right? Is it one of the transition ones? Is it a steel chassis? Does it have the barely big power transformer laydown? I'm guessing it might, right? It's probably close to like one of the AC/DC amps. I'm guessing something like that. And they have a lot of bass response, right? The shared cathode means on the first stage they use a 330 mic, somewhere about their cathode for both of them, which really pumps up the bass response, as well as the phase inverter coupling caps are usually 0.1s, which again fattens things way up, lower filtering as well, and a lot of feedback too, right? So they don't distort as hard as well. So the 67s, I've got one, a transition aluminum chassis deal that's pretty close to like an Angus amp, and I like that amp a lot. It's good for it's not great for Van Halen. You could do it with some pedals and things, but it's not that amp, but a very cool amp nonetheless. So glad to see you got that. Let's see what's in that. The Nosim, am I pronouncing that right? Nohcim. Hope so. The Nosim. Hey Ozzy, I have a grease monkey and an orangutan that I love to pieces. Orangutan needs a little assistance. I think we've been talking, but I'll put a contact. You can always contact me at Ozzy at 3monkeysamps.com. Right? So Ozzy at 3monkeysamps.com. And I'll be happy to answer any questions. All right, so we got Mr. Guitarman 777. Outstanding. All right, thank you. Appreciate that. Then we've got BMF 5150. Hey, how you doing? Your amp is based off the idea of Eddie's Bandmaster and how he used the extension speaker out and not the speaker out, which gave him a low output signal, correct? And I answered that below, but I'll go into it a little bit more. So the inspiration came from that bit of knowledge. Yes, trick was to figure out how to get it to work with the Marshall without blowing up the amp when signal was present, right? So yeah, I mean, if you ground out a signal, on the chassis or whatever, a certain amount is going to cheat through the other taps as well, and it's going to be much lower. You're also dealing with a reflected impedance issue, going back to the tubes, as what you put on one side of the transformer, the other side of the transformer will adjust. Well, it doesn't adjust, but the math will work out that the plate load for those power tubes will change as well. So yeah, the trick was like, I think that's, sort of what was going on with Ed's amp. Right, so that we could talk about for a couple of seconds, I think. And I apologize for the lighting in here, but my lighting actually blew out when I put it on. The bulb must have decided that it had enough. So it's a little bit grainy, a little bit dark, a little bit weird, but I'll get that replaced ASAP. But anyway, going back to that quick topic. What's the best way to start with this? All right, so I think, Ed was obviously trying to figure out a way to get to where he eventually ended up, which was like a wet-dry rig, right? So when we last saw him, his system was basically based around a master head that was loaded and then went out to effects like the Eventides and the reverb, not the reverb, but the delay units, things like that. And then went to power amps, and then kind of, went out to some speakers, right? That would be then mic'd to give the house sound, or something around those ways. I wouldn't be surprised if on certain nights he was using a much more direct sound. I've heard rumors to the effect, but yeah. So in the beginning, he had to load the Marshall down to bring it down to line level, right? So my guess is that he was doing it in a less than optimum way. That may have, endangered the way that the amplifier operated, right? And I think he was messing with the bias a little bit. That, the tubes were probably running pretty hot. So the idea came from that, but it wasn't exactly grounding it out and just running with it, right? It was sort of like, hey, that was like, well, Eddie did that. I'm sure that Eddie probably played the Marshall that way, like figured out a way to play the Marshall that way. It was like, that's kind of cool. Probably blew up on him. But then he was thinking, well, maybe I should figure out a way to do this safely. And then he came up with the load box. Maybe the load box resistors weren't quite right? Or there was a mistake in them, or they got unplugged, or there was a short in them. Some different ideas, and he just kept blowing his amp up. So the hard part was really just to figure out how to make it run really hot, but make it run safe, right? So it involved the power transformer, it involved the output transformer and the load and all those things. But yeah, the initial idea came from that exact sort of like thing that he had talked about over the years, and with a Bandmaster using, 2 6L6s, and it had less, plate voltage than a Marshall. It kind of, you could get away with it, right? And I think everybody's probably done that by accident more than once with a Fender, right? I mean, I have my deluxe reverb, same thing with the extension speaker out. More than once, I've done that, right? And been like, why is it so quiet? And then all of a sudden, you realize, oh, I've got it in the extension jack. And then you might use it, right? So yeah, some of that idea came from there, but it was more along the lines of realizing that loading might be sort of the answer to get that sound that's more like a synthesizer. Right? So it distorts differently. It sounds different than my other amps do, without a doubt. Okay, let's see what we got. I think that was the last question. Yeah, so where are we at? We're at 18 minutes. So I think that's good for this one here. Hopefully there'll be some more questions. If not, I'll come up with my own questions and I'll bother you with some more observations and challenge you guys with a couple of questions. But yeah, I think we suffice it to say, roundup of the whole thing. We hear everything different. Physics is enormous in terms of how something sounds. Where it is very much a difference of how things sound. Studio magic is real, and Marshalls sound great just before they blow up. All right, so thanks for watching, and we'll see you next time.